on the succession front, I'd be curious, when when do you feel like folks would be thinking about that? And it's just talked about all the time, but I find this is one of the areas that it's so it's so avoided because there's conflict present in there's often narratives tied to something that someone's avoiding in relationship to the succession. And this will happen when you start talking to someone and they're like, yeah, well, I really think, I want to talk to you about it. And then you start getting into it. And like, okay, yeah, well, we're not ready to work on this right now. Right. We're not ready to work on this right now, which is, because part of us is not on board. We got this parts alignment challenge, right? Part of us believes we need to plan for the future. And part of us is scared shitless about the whole topic for various reasons. And I look at it as, quite frankly, I look at it as pre-succession. Let's not talk about succession. Let's talk about what needs to happen pre-succession, right? And I'll bring that into the conversation. But what's your vantage point on when should a family think about that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever thought about it in that way. So I don't know that in my brain there's a when, but more a why. So I think for every family to have these conversations proactively, meaning it doesn't really matter if it's 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years before there's going to be an actual transition. The other thing is, to backstep a moment, I look at transition as being two pieces, right? There's the piece of who's going to be running the company, and then there's the piece of family or ownership, or what you want to call it, depending on who you're talking to, about who's going to be the stakeholders in the company and in the family, the owners or eventual owners, who there is going to be a transition in who's going to be making those decisions. What's the direction of the company? Who's going to be making decisions about why and how we continue on? What kind of risk are we willing to take on? What kind of financial reward are we as family members or stakeholders looking for in return? So there are two different types of transition, and often in families, the transition, the succession process is looking at who's going to take over the company, but there are lots of other decisions. And that goes into how do you make a decision about the sooner the better in that, right? Because the easiest way to start to define that is to understand who's making and what kinds of decisions now, so that you could teach even a 12-year-old about what it means to be an engaged owner. So that 12-year-old may never touch the business, actually work in the business, but learning to be an engaged owner so that 20 years down the road, if somebody makes a bid on this company and they're a substantial shareholder, they're really clear on what the implications of selling their shares or making a decision to sell the company, or the engaged ownership is a really important dynamic that can really happen at any time. So I don't know that there's a time. What I do think is significant is if people can do this and have these conversations proactively, it works to everyone's benefit. So you were talking about people don't like to have a conversation because there are reasons. We're all protective as family members of each other. So if we start talking about who's going to take over the company, is that related to the fact that my brother is in a role in the organization and shouldn't probably be there and is paid twice what he should be? And really, my sister should be taking over the company, but no one wants to voice this because it's going to blow up decades of family dynamics that have existed where we've all been given equal treatment in every way.
Right.
But maybe it's time for there not to be equal treatment. And this is where policies and governance and other things come into play. So what's really behind the not talking about it? Like, what's being protected? When you talk about retirement, sometimes, and again, unconsciously, what are you protecting? Are kids protecting their parents because their parents have never had a relationship outside of work, and now they don't have the business, they're going to go do what? And we're scared of what's going to happen with our parents. Then it's better for their parents, who are adults, to figure that out than us to be all protective of it by not having a conversation about what's next for them in their lives. So there are lots of things, underlying family dynamics, that could come out from having business conversations. But again, having the conversations proactively is way safer than waiting till they blow up. Because once they blow up, it's harder for you and I, and anybody else involved, to untangle it. So proactive, no matter when it is a plus.
Yeah, that's really good. You point out so many things that, we're, the other way to, I guess, look at the question is what am I afraid of, or what am I afraid might happen? It's another way you can look at that. It's just a question to ask. What am I afraid might happen? To put on, like, just to really put on the table what your the narrative that you've established, and you can say, but no, but that's totally true. That's totally true. I had someone reach out last week, and they're it's a smaller family business, and it's three brothers, and they're all involved. And he said, well, pretty much we don't really agree on a lot of things. And I'm like, okay. And I said, okay. And I said, well, how does that happen? How do you manage that? And he said, well, always the first question I always ask them when I get on the phone is, do your other family members know we're talking? That's one of the first questions I've learned to ask, right? Because you never know. But anyway, he's like, well, typically we're an Italian family, and so we're very loud and boisterous, and it pretty much turns into a yelling match, and everything turns into an argument. And so there's a narrative right there, right? Everything's an argument. We have a yelling, like, this is how we look at who we are and how things are. So think about a business like this where you want to look at, but there's this pull. They all realize that they're not totally happy the way things are being run right now and how they're making decisions. But at the same time, they know to work through that, they've got to enter this dialogue of argument. And I said, well, where your brothers stand on working with someone to help you manage your conflict and figure out how you can be better communicators and get clarity and really where you want to take the business. And he's like, well, we know we need help, but we don't know what we want to do, and this and that. And you sort of say, no. And when's the right time? So you get into that dialogue, right? When's the right time? Which is an avoidance strategy that we'll do to ourselves, right? Or because time's a great illusion that we can sell to ourselves and other people, because I think a lot of us in general look at time, this construct of time is that it's very limited and there's not enough of it. So it's a good one, right? It's a great story.